In April 1943, a captured American tank sat bleeding oil onto the concrete floor of Germany's most secretive weapons facility. The M4 Sherman, serial number USA 3067842, looked like it had crawled out of hell. Paint scorched black. Turret hatch twisted open. One track severed and coiled like a dead snake. Around it, 24 German engineers stood in absolute silence. They'd heard the rumors from Tunisia, from Sicily, from every god-forsaken battlefield where German crews swore they'd killed these American boxes, only to watch 3 more roll over the horizon before the smoke even cleared. Inferior armor. Weak gun. So why won't they stop coming? The head engineer raised his hand. Torches flared to life. Chalk marks appeared on the hull, dotted lines where they'd cut the tank open like a cadaver. Everyone expected to find something. A secret alloy. Hidden plating. Some American trick that explained why this ugly, simple machine kept haunting their nightmares. They were about to discover the truth was far more terrifying than any secret. Before we dive into this story, subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now, relax, grab your coffee, and enjoy this beautiful story. But the story didn't begin in that cold testing hall. It began 1,000 miles south, in the North African desert, where Oberleutnant Erich Schmitz was winning battles, and slowly realizing he was losing the war. Schmitz commanded a Panther. He was proud of it. The long-barreled K-42, the sloped frontal armor, the Maybach engine that purred like orchestrated violence. A machine that looked every bit the apex predator its name promised. On a scorching afternoon in Tunisia, his Panther crouched behind a rocky outcrop, invisible against the ochre landscape. Through his commander's periscope, Schmitz watched them approach. Shermans. 4 of them, moving in loose formation across the open ground. They looked wrong to him. Too tall, too angular. Like someone had welded sheet metal around an engine and called it armor. His gunner, Weber, muttered something under his breath. Like shooting crates. Schmitz had heard that before. He'd also seen what happened when German crews underestimated those crates. Target left, he ordered, voice steady. Lead tank. The gun traversed with mechanical precision. Weber exhaled slowly. Feuer. The 75mm shell screamed across the desert. The lead Sherman erupted. Turret blown sideways, smoke gushing from the hull. The remaining 3 scattered, 1 reversing frantically, 2 attempting to flank through a wadi. Schmitz adjusted. Next target. Quickly. Another shot. Another kill. The 3rd Sherman vanished behind a dune. The 4th tried to return fire. Its shell ricocheted harmlessly off the Panther's glacis plate. Weber reloaded with practiced speed. The 4th Sherman died burning. 3 kills in under 2 minutes. Schmitz should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he felt something else creeping up his spine. Because by sunset, when his Panther withdrew to the rally point, he'd seen 7 more Shermans moving up to replace the ones he'd destroyed. By the next morning, there were 12. By the end of the week, an entire American armored column had materialized where he'd left nothing but smoking wrecks. That night, sitting on his Panther's engine deck while mechanics worked on a failing transmission again, Schmitz said something quietly to his crew. This war isn't about who builds the better tank. He lit a cigarette, staring at the stars. It's about who can afford to lose more of them. He was closer to the truth than he realized. Hundreds of kilometers north, in a complex of brick buildings far from any front line, Ober-engineer Hans Meyer ran his hand along the captured Sherman's flank. He didn't care what it looked like in battle. He cared how it was built. Hans had spent 20 years in factories. Before the war, automobiles, agricultural equipment, industrial machinery, anything with gears and tolerances. He had one obsession that his colleagues found irritating. He hated waste. Not just wasted steel, though that bothered him. Wasted movements, wasted machining hours, wasted complexity, over-engineering for the sake of pride rather than function. War had dragged him into a different kind of factory, one that built machines for killing. He didn't enjoy that, but he believed in his craft. If Germany was going to pour precious resources into tanks, it should at least do so intelligently. The problem? Germany had never learned how to do that. They built tanks like Swiss watches, beautiful, precise, temperamental. Hans had walked the Panther production lines in Daimler-Benz. He'd reviewed the Tiger blueprints at Henschel. Too many parts. Too many custom fittings. Too many things that had to be exactly right, or they wouldn't work at all. And now he stood before an American machine that looked like someone had designed it with a sledgehammer. He stared at the Sherman's crude welds, its cast hull, its utilitarian angles. Then he smiled faintly. "Let's see why you refuse to die." The Sherman sat on steel blocks in the center of the testing hall. Track links scattered across the floor. Turret jammed at an uncomfortable angle. Overhead, industrial lamps cast hard white light that made every imperfection visible. Hans gathered his team, junior engineers, welding technicians, a few soldiers on temporary assignment from weapons testing battalions. Some looked eager, others skeptical. "Gentlemen," Hans announced, tapping the Sherman's hull with his knuckles, "today, we dissect the American workhorse." A young draftsman named Kurt, fresh from the Technical Institute, still convinced of German superiority, snorted softly. "Workhorse? Looks more like a donkey." A few chuckles. Hans didn't smile. "Donkeys," he said evenly, "can carry a load for 20 years. Thoroughbreds break down after one race." He turned back to the tank. "Let's find out which one we've been building." The torches flared. The cutting began. And in that moment, the real secret of the Sherman, the one that would shake German confidence to its core, was about to be laid bare. 3 days after his conversation under the stars, Schmitz destroyed another Sherman column. 5 tanks this time. Clean kills at range. Textbook gunnery. The Americans never saw where the shots came from. By the time the survivors retreated, black smoke pillared into the cloudless sky like funeral markers. Schmitz allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. It lasted exactly 4 hours. By late afternoon, his radio operator picked up American chatter. Fresh armor moving up the same road. Schmitz repositioned to a new vantage point and counted them through his optics. 8 Shermans. More than he'd just destroyed. "They're like ants," Weber muttered from the gunner's seat. Schmitz didn't answer. He was watching something else, his engine temperature gauge creeping into the red zone. Again. "Commander," his driver called up, voice tight with frustration. "Air filters are clogging. I need to shut down and clean them, or we'll cook the engine." Schmitz exhaled slowly. "How long?" 2 hours. Maybe 3 if the sand's baked into the mesh." 2 hours. While 8 American tanks rolled past their position unopposed. He gave the order. The Panther's engine died with a mechanical sigh. That night, while his crew disassembled filtration systems by lamplight, Schmitz walked the perimeter. His loader, a grizzled veteran named Holtz, who'd fought in Poland and France, was smoking beside the track assembly, staring at the exposed drive sprocket. "We spend more time fixing this beast than fighting in it," Holtz said without looking up. Schmitz wanted to argue. He couldn't. The math was damning. For every hour of combat, they spent 6 hours on maintenance. Cleaning filters, adjusting track tension, nursing the temperamental transmission, waiting for parts that never arrived. At dawn, a supply officer confirmed what Schmitz already suspected. Replacement drive wheels were 3 weeks out. Spare final drives? Maybe next month. The factories couldn't keep pace with battlefield attrition. "We're cannibalizing dead Panthers to keep live ones moving," the officer admitted, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "Every breakdown is becoming permanent." Later that morning, Schmitz walked past a cluster of abandoned American vehicles, Shermans the crews had ditched after running out of fuel or ammunition. He expected to see the same worn-out exhaustion he saw in German equipment. Instead, he found engines that still turned over, suspensions that showed minimal wear despite the desert's punishment. One Sherman's odometer read over 800 kilometers. His Panther rarely made it past 400 before something critical failed. Schmitz crouched beside a Sherman's bogie wheel, running his hand over the track links. Simple, crude, functional. For the first time, he asked himself the question that would haunt him for the rest of the war. What keeps bringing them back? It wasn't courage. It wasn't tactics. It was something else. Something his beautiful, powerful, fragile Panther didn't have. The cutting torch hissed to life, spitting orange sparks across the testing hall floor. Hans stood back as his team traced the chalk lines, surgical incisions into the Sherman's hull. They'd start with the frontal armor, then work their way back through the sponsons and turret ring. If there was a secret, it would reveal itself in the metal. The torch bit deep. Steel peeled away in glowing strips. When the first section came free, Hans stepped forward immediately, running his hand along the exposed cross-section. He brought a magnifier to his eye, checked the grain structure, tested the hardness with a diamond-tipped scribe. Then he straightened, expressionless. "Well?" Kurt pressed forward, eager. "What is it? Chrome molybdenum alloy? Face-hardened plate?" Hans shook his head slowly. "Rolled homogeneous armor, standard grade." He tapped the metal with his knuckle. Nothing exotic, nothing special. Silence spread through the team like a cold draft. Kurt stared at the hull section as if it had personally betrayed him. This can't be right. This can't be what's keeping them alive out there. He gestured at the crude welds visible along the seams. "Look at this. It's primitive." "Precisely," Hans said quietly. He moved to the turret casting, examining where the metal had been poured into molds rather than machined from plate. The surface was rough, unrefined. In a German factory, this would have been rejected as substandard. "Gentlemen," Hans addressed the room, "what you're seeing is philosophy, not metallurgy." He pointed at the Sherman's armor. "America uses adequate materials and builds them in overwhelming quantity. He gestured toward the door, toward Germany beyond. "We use exquisite materials at unsustainable cost." Kurt frowned. "But superior materials mean superior protection. Superior materials mean superior unit performance," Hans interrupted. "But only if that unit reaches the battlefield. Only if it stays there." He ran his finger along a weld bead, thick, ugly, but structurally sound. "These welds are crude, but they're forgiving. Any welder can make them. Any factory can produce them. No delicate precision required." Another engineer examined the casting marks. "The tolerances are loose." "Intentionally," Hans confirmed. The first twist settled over the room like a revelation no one wanted to accept. The Sherman's strength wasn't in superior materials. Hans stepped back, studying the dissected tank with new interest. If not the armor, then what? Where did the advantage hide? He looked at his team. "Strip the drivetrain." I want to see the engine, transmission, and suspension. All of it. Something was there. Something Germany had missed entirely. And Hans intended to find it. Reconnaissance photos arrived in a manila envelope marked Dringend, urgent. Schmitz spread them across his map table, and his stomach tightened. The images showed Allied supply lines snaking back from the front like arteries feeding a vast organism. Convoy after convoy. Fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, flatbeds hauling spare parts. Mobile repair depots the size of small factories. Recovery vehicles with cranes powerful enough to lift entire tank hulls. His intelligence officer, Lieutenant Kress, pointed to one photograph. This depot appeared 3 days ago. Wasn't there on the last pass. He tapped another. Neither was this one. Schmitz counted the tanks visible in the staging areas. 40, maybe 50. And these were just the ones caught on camera. How? He asked quietly. Kress had no answer. A week later, German infantry overran an abandoned American position. Among the scattered equipment, they found a technical manual, TM 9731A, Operator and Organizational Maintenance. Schmitz flipped through it, expecting the usual incomprehensible technical specifications. Instead, he found illustrated step-by-step procedures, simple language, instructions a teenager could follow. Engine removal, 2 men, 4 hours, he read aloud. No specialized tools required. He looked up at Holtz. Is this accurate? Holtz took the manual, scanning the diagrams. His face darkened. If it is, they can fix in the field what takes us a factory. Meanwhile, German quartermasters sent increasingly desperate reports. Tank readiness was collapsing. 53% operational in Schmitz's battalion, 41% in the division. Parts were rationed. Mechanics worked miracles with scavenged components. The Panther beside Schmitz's own had been deadlined for 11 days waiting for a replacement transmission. Then Schmitz saw it himself. An American recovery team working on 2 damaged Shermans in a captured village. He watched through binoculars from a concealed position, unable to engage without revealing his location. 4 men, standard tools. They pulled the engine from a wrecked Sherman, turret blown open, hull fire blackened, and swapped it into another tank with a damaged power plant. It took them 3 hours. By sunset, the repaired Sherman rolled away under its own power. Schmitz lowered his binoculars slowly. His Panther, sitting 30 meters behind him, had been waiting 9 days for parts. 9 days of immobility while the enemy rebuilt their tanks on the battlefield. The realization hit him like cold water. This wasn't tank versus tank. It was system versus system. And Germany's system was already losing. The Sherman's engine came out easier than Hans expected. 4 bolts, 2 hydraulic lines, a handful of electrical connections. His team lifted the radial engine from its compartment with an overhead crane, and it swung free without resistance. No custom brackets, no precision-fitted mounts. Crude, Kurt muttered, examining the engine. Bay. Look at the clearances. Millimeters of slop everywhere. Hans said nothing. He was staring at something else. The transmission housing had casting marks from 3 different foundries. The final drive gears showed machining signatures that didn't match. Even the track links bore stamps from separate manufacturers. Pull the spare parts, Hans ordered suddenly. The crate that came with the tank. 2 soldiers dragged over a wooden crate stenciled with American markings. Inside, gearbox assemblies, drive sprockets, bogie wheels, all jumbled together without organization. Hans selected a transmission gear at random. Install this. The mechanic looked confused. But sir, we don't know which Sherman this came from. Install it. The mechanic shrugged and dropped the gear into place. It fit perfectly. Hans reached into the crate again. Another part. Different factory code. He handed it over. Try this drive sprocket. Again, perfect fitment. No filing, no adjustments, no hand fitting required. Kurt stared, color draining from his face. That's impossible. Parts from different production runs don't just... They do if you design them that way, Hans interrupted quietly. He walked to the blackboard mounted on the testing hall wall and began sketching. Universal interchangeability. The Americans build to tolerances loose enough that any part fits any tank. He drew 2 overlapping circles. We build to tolerances so tight that each component must be individually matched. But that sacrifices precision, Kurt protested. It sacrifices individual precision for systemic reliability, Hans corrected. He pointed at the Sherman. A Panther's gearbox is practically hand-fitted. Beautiful, perfect, and completely irreplaceable in the field. He gestured at the crate of parts. These? A crew mechanic can swap them with a wrench and a hammer. The room fell silent. Another engineer spoke slowly, working through the implications. If any part fits any tank, then every tank becomes a source of spare parts for every other tank, Hans finished. The second twist crystallized. The Sherman's genius wasn't in being built for perfection. It was built for mass maintenance. Hans stared at the disassembled American machine. Germany had been building tanks like artists crafting masterpieces. America had been building them like farmers maintaining tractors. And on the battlefield, the farmer was winning. The track link snapped at 0200 hours. Schmitz felt it through the hull. A sharp crack followed by the grinding shriek of metal on metal. His driver killed the engine immediately, but the damage was done. 50 kilometers of rocky Tunisian terrain had finally found the Panther's breaking point. Everyone out, Schmitz ordered. We're not moving until this is fixed. The repair took all night. Holtz and the driver worked by shielded lamplight, disconnecting the damaged track section pin by pin. Each link weighed 30 kilograms. The replacement. Pins had to be heated, hammered, and cooled precisely, or they wouldn't hold. By dawn, all 4 men were coated in grease and exhaustion. Schmitz sat on the engine deck, watching the eastern sky lighten. He kept thinking about the Sherman from yesterday's engagement. He'd hit it twice, both rounds penetrating the side armor. It should have died. Instead, it had reversed into cover, smoking but mobile, turret still traversing, stubborn, relentless, still running. His beautiful Panther, untouched by enemy fire, sat crippled by its own complexity. 800 kilometers north, Hans ran his hand along the Sherman's suspension assembly. Look at this, he said to his team. Vertical volute springs. Simple, robust. He pressed down on one of the bogie wheels. It compressed smoothly, returning without binding. Designed for rough terrain. He moved to the air filtration system. Unlike the Panther's delicate mesh filters, the Sherman used an oil bath system, crude but effective. Sand and dust settled in oil rather than clogging fine screens. Tunisia, Hans murmured. They built this for Tunisia, for deserts. And Russia, another engineer added, examining the radiator shrouds. See these baffles? Cold weather starting aids. Kurt checked the engine mounts. Sir, the entire power pack slides out the rear on rails. 4 men could remove this in, he calculated, maybe 2 hours? In the field? Hans nodded slowly. He was beginning to see the complete picture. The Sherman wasn't designed for parade grounds or proving ranges. It was designed for mud, for dust, for heat and cold and the thousand small brutalities of sustained combat operations. He thought of German tanks, elegant, powerful, temperamental. Machines that demanded perfect conditions and expert care. "Gentlemen," Hans said softly, almost to himself, "they were not building a masterpiece." He looked at the Sherman, scarred, simple, functional. They were building a workhorse. And workhorses didn't need to be beautiful. They just needed to keep pulling the plow. The conference room in Berlin smelled of cigarette smoke and failing confidence. Hans stood before a table of industry officials and military procurement officers. His preliminary report spread between them like an indictment. Outside, the city continued its wartime routines. Inside, Hans was about to dismantle their assumptions. "The Sherman," he began without preamble, "is not a tank. It's a system." He placed a photograph on the table. An aerial view of an American depot in England. This single facility stocks 50,000 spare parts. Engines, transmissions, track assemblies. They have floating repair depots in the channel. Mobile workshops that can rebuild a tank in 48 hours. An official from the Armaments Ministry interrupted. "We have repair facilities that require tanks to be transported back to Germany," Hans cut in. "The Americans repair at the front, and they build," he paused for emphasis, "thousands per year. Estimates suggest 48,000 Shermans by war's end." Silence. "Impossible," someone muttered. Hans continued, merciless. "Standardized manufacturing, assembly lines in Detroit using automotive production methods. 5 factories producing identical components that fit any Sherman anywhere." He tapped the report. "Universal interchangeability, mass production, distributed logistics." A Panzer procurement colonel shifted uncomfortably. "Our Tigers are superior in every technical measure. And how many are operational?" Hans asked quietly. The colonel's face darkened. "That's... battlefield conditions vary. 50 to 60%, Hans stated flatly. "On a good week." He produced another document. "Sherman readiness rates, 85%. Consistently." The room absorbed this like a physical blow. Hans pressed forward. "We build 20 Panthers per week. They build 200 Shermans. Our tanks require expert mechanics and precision parts. Theirs require a wrench and a manual any conscript can read." He leaned forward. "Gentlemen, we cannot out-engineer a nation that outproduces us." An older official, a veteran of the last war, spoke slowly. "You're saying our technological superiority is irrelevant?" "I'm saying," Hans replied, "that perfection in small numbers loses to adequacy at scale. Every time." The uncomfortable truth settled over the room like ash. Someone asked the question they were all thinking. "Then what do we do?" Hans looked at them, seeing the pride warring with practicality in their faces. "That," he said quietly, "is above my authority to answer." But they all knew the real answer. It was already too late. The briefing hall was meant to inspire confidence. Oak paneling, military banners, a massive map of Europe still showing German territorial gains that no longer existed. Hans entered carrying a single folder. 20 senior officers waited, including, he noted with a knot in his stomach, General Oberst Heinz Guderian himself. The architect of Blitzkrieg, the man who'd revolutionized armored warfare. Hans was about to tell him it wasn't enough. "Gentlemen," Hans began, opening the folder. "The captured M4A1 Sherman, serial USA 3067842, has been completely analyzed. I will be direct." He placed the first page on the overhead projector. "The armor. Ordinary rolled, homogeneous steel. No exotic alloys. No revolutionary metallurgy. Next page. The gun. Adequate 75mm, inferior to our KBO K-42. Penetration values unremarkable. Next page. The engine. Simple radial design, underpowered compared to our Maybach systems. Several officers exchanged satisfied glances. Hans continued without pause. The transmission. Loose tolerances, crude manufacture. Parts interchange universally across all units, regardless of production facility. He advanced the slides methodically. Suspension. Basic vertical volute springs. Maintenance. Designed for field repair by non-specialists. Engine removal. 4 hours, standard tools. The glances became less satisfied. Industrial capacity. Estimated production, 48,000 units. Logistics network. Continental scale parts distribution, floating repair depots, standardized maintenance protocols. His voice remained clinical. Operational readiness, 85% sustained average. Guderian leaned forward. And our Panthers? Hans met his eyes. 53%, sir. Tigers, 48%. The room shifted uncomfortably. Hans placed the final page on the projector, the report's conclusion. His hand was steady, but his voice carried the weight of undeniable truth. American tanks emphasize reliability over excellence in components. He let that sentence hang in the air for 3 heartbeats. Then he read the next line. We are losing because our tanks do not work. Silence. Not the respectful silence of military decorum. The stunned silence of pride cracking under pressure. An officer started to speak, stopped. Another looked at his notes, then slowly set them down. Guderian's face remained expressionless, but Hans saw his jaw tighten. Excellence on paper, Hans said quietly, means nothing if the machine cannot fight day after day. We built masterpieces. They built workhorses. He closed the folder. The workhorses are winning. Someone in the back asked hoarsely, "Can we adapt?" Hans thought of the production lines, the supply networks, the industrial philosophy embedded in every Sherman component. "No, sir," he said simply. "Not in time." The truth settled over the room like winter frost. Germany had lost the invisible war, the one fought in factories and supply depots, long before the tanks ever met on the battlefield. Hans found him 3 weeks later, standing in the freezing mud of a French forest. The Panther sat motionless 20 meters away, tracks shredded, engine compartment open like a gutted animal. Mechanics had given up hours ago. No parts, no time. The tank would be abandoned when the unit withdrew at dusk. Oberleutnant Erich Schmitz didn't turn when Hans approached. He just kept staring at his dead machine. "You're the engineer," Schmitz said quietly. "From Kummersdorf." "Yes." "Did you find it?" Schmitz's voice was hollow. "The secret? Some hidden trick that makes their tanks live forever?" Hans stepped beside him, boots sinking into the cold earth. He looked at the Panther, its elegant lines, its powerful gun, its sophisticated engineering rendered meaningless by mechanical failure. "No secrets," Hans said. "Just simplicity." Schmitz finally turned. His face was gaunt, aged beyond his years. "Then how?" Hans gestured at the broken Panther. "This machine is brilliant, complex, powerful." He paused. "The Sherman we tested at Kummersdorf ran 5,100 miles before major failure." Schmitz stared. 5,000? "More than 10 times what your Panther typically achieves," Hans confirmed. "Not because of exotic materials, not because of revolutionary design." He met Schmitz's eyes. "Because they built it to be simple enough that it wouldn't break, and when it did break, simple enough that anyone could fix it." The wind moved through the bare trees. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. We built masterpieces, Hans continued softly. Precision instruments. Machines that demanded perfect conditions and expert care. He looked at the Panther again. They built tractors. Crude, ugly, unstoppable. Schmitz turned back to his tank, the machine he'd been so proud of months ago. Now it sat useless, waiting to be destroyed by its own crew so the enemy couldn't capture it. Hans spoke the words one final time, the conclusion that had silenced rooms full of generals. We did not lose to an invincible tank. We lost because ours could not stay running. The truth hung between them like fog. Schmitz stared across the forest, seeing past the trees to something larger. Tunisia, Sicily, Normandy. Every battlefield where German technical superiority had crumbled under logistical reality. It was never really about the tanks, was it? He asked. No, Hans agreed. It was about the factories, the supply chains, the philosophy. The real battlefield had always been invisible. Fought in Detroit assembly lines and Atlantic convoy routes and American industrial pragmatism. Germany had brought swords to a factory war. And factories don't care how sharp your blade is. They just keep building.